Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 10th audio chat on the Q News Patriot audio file Rumble channel. I'm the Q News Patriot. My name is SG Anon. Today, I have with us a citizen journalist who has a lot of experience in understanding just how deep, just how pervasive MKUltra goes, just how deep the warped lenses that we get presented with in different areas of our society through our social groups, through our social constructs, our spheres, our schools, education in general, and just how the system itself is sort of purposefully designed to rob us of our better sense, to weaponize our own emotions against us in many cases. And if you've listened to this program or followed any of these chats or files for any length of time, you're well aware that we talk a lot about the idea that mind control, if we can use the term, it is real. It's not in the sense that we would like to think of where someone asserts their will over another in the sci-fi movies. It's much more subtle. It's much more sinister, and it's much more effective, I think, at sort of co-opting one's own sense of pride, one's own sense of identity, one's own sense of belonging against one's own better health and one's own better safety, right? If we look at all of us out there over these last many decades, all of our lives and then the lives of our parents and grandparents, and we look at the cultural truisms and many of the cultural understandings that have governed our world, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Cancer is just a thing. It's very sad. Other areas of this program that sort of short circuit our curiosity and our ability to vertically analyze, to ask the probing questions, and really to ascertain, is this information, is this conclusion that I'm coming to and the information that it's based on, is it genuine, is it transparent, and is it full and complete? And so without further ado, we're going to introduce Miss Tania. We're going to have a great chat today. Miss Tania, thank you for coming on.
Hey, thank you so much. It's an honor to be on the show with you, and what great points you made in the intro. I mean, this is crazy. I tell you, I hear you talk about this, and of course I talk about this, but when I hear it, I still sometimes kind of get shaken and go, I can't believe this is our reality. Like this is, and it's not a new reality, right? I mean, this has been going on for decades. But so many are just starting to wake up to it. And it's really unbelievable how deep the deep state, if you will, the narrative goes, and how long it's been being pushed. It's unbelievable.
It absolutely is. And that's the narrative is actually where I'd like to start today, because we're witnessing, I think, with anyone out there, regardless of your lens, whether you're a conspiracy or not, whether you're deep military operations or not, whether you believe in those sorts of things or not, one of the things that is sort of unmistakable and inarguable for everyone out there is that there is this clear warfare back and forth for control of opinions, for control of
Yes.
ideologies, and sort of the protection and the advancement of certain ideologies, and the repression and obliteration of other ideologies. And we're witnessing that back and forth in the narrative space, really from both sides. We like to think of the black hat actors as driving the narrative warfare, and in many respects they
Hmm.
are. Q, the entity known as Q that I draw a lot of my content from, refers to the mainstream media as the enemy of the people and the enemy of humanity. But that
Mm.
being said, the program itself, when we're talking about MKUltra, we're talking about, what amounts to a complex, excuse me, a complex biophysical software program, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
a bioneurotic software that
Hmm.
takes the impulses in the brain, takes the ability of the
Yeah.
human being to reason themselves into and out of a situation and sort of thwarts it, causes a short circuit in those pathways. And so you have a lot of really great patriots, a lot of really wonderful people clear on the other side of the narrative warfare space. And they too seek the obliteration and the repression and the destruction
Yeah.
of anything that is sort of countervailing to where they're at. And while I'm not espousing that we should approve of or accept any of the radical lefts, the Marxists, the communists, the ridiculousness that they propose, far from it. But what I am saying is that responding in an equally militant, militarized,
Right.
closed-minded fashion does us no good.
Right.
And we don't get a
Hmm.
chance to break through to what the real truth is behind everything, right? When Julian Assange comes out and says, I have data to show corruption so deep and so vast and so wide that 98% of all public servants and all governments everywhere would go down if the data was to be released and fully
Hmm.
digested by the mass population around the
Hmm.
world. And so
Yeah.
that's a remarkable statement, and I think it's worth noting that in our quest for that truth and our quest for the sorts of things that Assange showed out to the world, and that he and other individuals like him are in possession of, it's very, very important, I think, to remember that if we don't progress forward in a love and and sort of an acceptance based, a sort of a prodigal son kind of mentality
Hmm.
with the other side of the political ideology and the political divides, we're not really going to get humanity as one we the
Yeah.
people, as one large ass group of organisms together on enough of the same issues that we can permanently throw off this cabal. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, those are great. There's so many. Gosh, as you were talking, I was thinking like, oh, I could say something about that. Oh, I could say something about that. But at the end, I think as a big picture, something that we have lost as a society is compassion and the ability to, it's interesting because as part of this narrative, they have pushed this concept of tolerance. We have to be tolerant of everything. But the interesting thing is that actually we need to be compassionate. Compassionate is different than tolerant. And the other side, if you will, right? The side that is anti-God, put it that way, because that's ultimately what I believe this is. This is a war of good versus evil. This is a war of God's ways, and within that is a very wide bucket. There are people in that are going, we want to do it God's ways, and even within there, they may disagree a little bit on how some of that looks. But in the big picture, it's God's ways versus kind of this anti-God narrative, this anti-humanity, right? This concept that we know, I mean, Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and so many of them, they say this, you will own nothing, you will have zero, but you will also be happy about it. That in itself, that one statement is an entire brainwashing slave mentality. They're going to go, they're going to own everything. The elites are going to eat what they want, they're going to own what they want. You're going to have nothing, but you're going to be happy about it. It's that MKUltra mind brainwashing narrative. And I think that I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over the place here a little bit, but I think that we have to get back to that place of compassion because the individuals who are in this kind of anti-God narrative, if we could go with them with this in a compassionate form and be loving, that could actually soften them to help them to see, wait a minute, I'm actually falling for a narrative that's going to destroy me in the end. I think about this, and I know we talked about it off air a little bit, and we don't have to get deep into it right now, but just the quick thing with my daughter, my oldest daughter has been pulled into this transgender narrative, right? This religion, this ideology. Um, and the sad thing is that that side of the world, that side of the narrative, they have these individuals so brainwashed into thinking you can take these medications, you could take puberty blockers, and if you decide in 5 years you don't want that, no problem, you can just reverse course. That's an absolute lie. I mean, the medical field knows that. That's a lie. That they will take those and their lives will be destroyed medically. We don't even have to talk about spiritually, emotionally, mentally, just medically their lives will be destroyed. And so if we can, in the end, like I look at my daughter and I look at individuals on the other side of all of these narratives and I go, okay, in the big picture, God loves them and he wants them to be free. He wants them to live free. He wants them to live in all that he created them to be, to walk out the destinies that I mean, everybody has their own calling within them, right? Not everyone's going to be running a podcast, not everyone's going to be on TV, not everyone's going to be a school teacher. Everybody has a unique calling, and those individuals those callings are being stolen from them by falling into this false narrative that is absolutely anti-God. So I think that there is a great need for compassion because if we as I don't like to even call myself a conservative necessarily. I just it's like I want to follow God in his ways. And I know that he created all of humanity in that same fashion, to give them more than they could ever dream, imagine, or think, to have them prosper, to have them be filled with joy and hope and peace, and have a family that goes on for generations. God didn't intend for the family unit to be broken or any of these things. So I think that base level of love and compassion, and look, they've even taken the love and twisted it. Love is love. Well, when you say love is love, that basically says what God's love is nothing important. It's nothing special, because love is love. Love is whatever you want to make of it. Well, then that kind of cheapens it in many ways. If it's just no big deal, it cheapens it. So yeah, it's a really complex situation that we find ourselves in, but I do believe that we have to find a way to be truthful, be honest, but also be compassionate and loving from the perspective of how God is loving.
Well, I mean, you just said it right there. We have to come from God's perspective. This is a great awakening, right? And it's an awakening of the soul. It's an awakening of the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
It's an awakening of the um, fervor and vitality and youthfulness and exuberance that all of humanity has, whether you're listening to this broadcast and you're in your mid to late 70s or 80s, or you're listening to this broadcast and you're 18 years old. You are
Mm-hmm.
sustained by the same vital, vibrant, fast moving, inspired feeling spirit. And we can always sort of tell when we're coming from that perspective, because we're much more able to absorb things that we disagree with, and we don't internalize
Yeah.
them, and they don't bother or erode us. We're much more able to appreciate someone else's point of view. We're able to feel it from their eyes, if you will. We're never
Yeah.
able to see things from their eyes because we're selfish beings, right? We have our two
Mm-hmm.
eyes. We have our individualized, selfish interpretation of the world and of life and spirituality and all of these wonderful things on this journey that we're all a part of. But we do have the ability, I think, to expand our energy enough that we can get a flavor, a taste, an understanding genuinely
Yeah.
of where someone else is coming from or what someone else is really going through. And that's good. That's a good segue into what we're going to talk about next here, because we talked about the transsexual movement and the individuals that get whipped up into this, right? They're captured very
Mm-hmm.
early, usually young adolescents. They're
Yes.
extremely impressionable. The system, as we have watched in the last few years, has gone completely rogue. We have states in
Yes.
the United States of America in 2023. Think about this. Where education systems are now legally protected from any sort of reprehension or harm if they encourage children to participate in gender conversion therapies or procedures
Mm-hmm.
without the parents' knowledge or consent. It's truly clown world, right? It's upside down land.
Yeah.
And what you said about it being anti-God, I think that's the best description that we could apply to this. It's anti-human, it's anti-God,
Yeah.
it's anti-life, it's antithetical to the idea that humanity should go forward as a burgeoning, blossoming, wonderful flower. It is very much a suppressive, warped ideology, which you commented about with the love is love. In addition to
Yeah.
cheapening God's love, it confuses individuals on what love actually is. You can have
Exactly.
love, you can have sexual pleasure, you can have friendship pleasure, you can have the company of a good friend, which is just contentment in and of its own self, right? You can
Yeah.
have satisfaction, and satisfaction does not have to come from the genitalia, right? Satisfaction can come from
Right.
all myriad of different things. And so when we say love
Exactly.
is love and you need to act on these feelings, well, what are you actually feeling? Are you feeling pleasure? Are you feeling
Right.
acceptance? Are you feeling for the first time maybe that you're in with a group of individuals that really get you? Are you feeling that you are safe in the space that you're in, whereas you may not feel safe in the space that you're in at home? Regardless, we can debate all day long on philosophically whether they should or shouldn't feel safe or how valid these feelings are. But at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, we have an emotional based system that has been created that is now weaponizing their feelings, their emotions,
That's right.
and
Yeah.
compelling their decisions in ways that are
Yeah.
really anti them in many respects. They're
Mm-hmm.
opposite. They're juxtaposed to what you would consider would be a proper way for humanity to sort of take things to the next
Mm-hmm.
step. It's an inverse of the Great Awakening itself in many regards. This sort of um, illogical rejection of biology,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we have thousands
Yeah.
and thousands of years of human history to show that this has never worked before. And at
Right.
different points along the way that it has been tried, such as in the Roman bathhouses and bath orgies, and different cultural practices of different societies throughout history, it has never remained around for a long time. In other words, it's not
Hmm.
been something that has been commonplace. It's not been something that
Right.
represents a logical next step. And so that's sort of what we're talking about. We're talking about the complete inversion of one's ability to self-direct in life, and that is the
Yeah.
slave, that is the prison that we're all in. They gave us 3 inch by 4 inch phone screens, and we had no idea that it was a cage.
Right.
um,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
so it's the capability of these phone screens and other systems like it in the information age. When we consider the nature of the enemy, they become very
Hmm.
effective delivery systems for trauma. There's a good
Yes.
there's a
Yeah.
very good basis in research to show that traumatic events in life, and especially in childhood, but in life in general, set up periods of time immediately post event where there is a much higher level of suggestibility and impressionability,
Yeah.
excuse me. There is a much more vulnerable period during and
Yeah.
immediately after any sort of traumatic event where we as
Yes.
human beings are sort of not all up in our own selves, and we're not,
Hmm.
we're not feeling really good and confident at the wheel of our own life, and we are much more susceptible to being swayed. Would you say that that has any factor in what's going on with not only the trans movement, but the radical leftists, the
Uh-huh.
climate
A
extremists
hundred
of
percent.
just that
Yes.
group?
Yes. 100%. Because, I mean, gosh, we could break it down to so many levels. We could break it down to the food, right? What they've been putting in our food, what they've been telling us to eat. That alone, over the last, since the 80s when the food pyramid came out, that alone has created us to be continuously filled with inflammation, which then it affects the way we think, affects the way we feel, affects the way we can move and do life. And then you think of, I love that you brought up the phones and these cages. You look at social media, and I know my oldest daughter, okay, she's going to be 24. Um, she also suffers some mental health issues. But in my opinion, a lot of these mental health issues stem from our foods. They stem from our vaccinations, which we know. I mean, that's a huge thing. The number of autistic people in our world right now is at an absolute high, alarming rate, and is continuously growing at such a dangerous rate. And that is all stemming from vaccines. I mean, that's proven. So you see then in this transgender, this trans mindset ideology, when you start diving in, and I mean, this is a topic I have researched and dove into very strongly for about 2.5 years. And before that, really a little bit, because my daughter started with some of this when she was around 10 years old. So that was 13 years ago. I didn't know what the term bisexual meant, 13 years ago. I didn't know what any of that meant. And so I slowly started learning. And over the last 2.5 years, if you start really diving in, you will find that the majority of people who are identifying in this way are also suffering from an autistic version of autism, a version of Asperger's, which is kind of high functioning autism, suffering from a bipolar disorder, suffering from schizophrenia. They're suffering from these traumas, and that goes back to compassion, because these traumas are rooted in abuse, neglect, abandonment, issues, right? That stem from family members or friends or schools or wherever that trauma gets introduced. But those things need to be healed. Those things are, our human body was not created to hold those kind of traumas. And when you start looking at when pornography was introduced on the internet, it was one thing when a child or a kid had to go dig into their parents' hope chest or whatever, wherever a Playboy magazine was hidden or whatever, and then they'd steal it, right? Whatever that story would be. But they don't have to do that anymore. In fact, there are stories that I've heard where little kids will be on their phone or on their parents' phone or on the computer watching something that is completely child safe friendly, and all of a sudden an ad pops up and the ad is pornographic. That one image, what that does to the brain of a child, particularly if that happens as a toddler, which we know it does, that puts a trauma into their mind because their mind is not prepared to see that. And that trauma, if not dealt with properly, grows and then leads to another trauma and then leads to more, complications down the road. And so now we're in this environment of these mid 20 to 30-year-olds who grew up on social media. This is the first time we're seeing this, where we're finally now starting to see what the impacts of this are. They had access to phones, they had access to computers, they had access to the internet at an unbelievable rate. I mean, my kids, my youngest, they were given computers in elementary school. It's just part of their education. And so these individuals have absolute, real traumatic experiences, real abuses. And the strangest thing to me is that we are now seeing this medical community, this psychiatric community, all of a sudden go, we don't need to treat that. We just need to put you on these other medications, get you in a different gender, mutilate your body, keep you hooked on drugs now for the next 50 years of your life, and it'll all go away. And that's not that where in the world did like these people studied? It blows my mind that a psychiatric doctor, a doctor who studied the mind, that they could possibly all of a sudden shift and go, that's the result. That's the answer. That will fix all these traumas. That's not going to fix the traumas. Now we're going to add into a female who, let's say, has had some severe trauma. We're going to throw a bunch of testosterone at her at 10 times the normal rate for just balancing hormones. So now we're going to get them really uptight and angry, right? Because now we've added all this testosterone that's not balanced. No wonder now we're seeing these crazy shootings. I mean, this is like, it is all tied in together. Every aspect of it is tied in together.
It's really amazing when you consider where we're at and how far we've come in this discussion just in the last 3.5 years to 5 years versus the amount of
Mm-hmm.
generational change that the enemy has managed to accomplish in the last, we'll say, 4 to 6 decades. Um,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, at this level, and some of the information you were just describing there is absolutely remarkable. I think the insight is very powerful, and it's important for patriots to remember that we really have to help these individuals get back inside their own brain and their own body again. We can't bring
Yes.
them over to our side. We can't walk forward with them and teach them how to be patriots and teach them how to love their own physical form that they chose far beyond and that God chose for them far beyond, or with them, I should say,
Mm-hmm.
far beyond and before they actually entered into this form, this physical form, right? I think that there are
That's
certain
right.
predispositions, if we want to call it that, that we would have to suppose are true in order to make sense of this thing called life. The form you choose to enter at a period of time in your development where your conscious choice was not yet a thing, that means your soul made that choice with you. And
Mm-hmm.
so coming into this form in the form or into this life in the form that you take and the body that you inhabit, it's really a beautiful thing. And if we look at the patterns throughout history, you're talking about trauma, and physical based trauma has always been one of the more effective pathways of this cabal, I think, to infiltrate
Yeah.
our minds
Always.
and to influence our own thought processes and our decision making just in general.
Because they're
Why
more
else?
susceptible. There's if somebody has already gone through a trauma, that's going to be a much easier person. And I hate to say it that way, but that's how sick and twisted this alternate reality is. They are not going after the strong ones. They know that the strong ones would never fall for it. So instead, they're going after the ones who are already compromised in their mind. And then you think about it, they're absolutely like these ones that are in this trans agenda movement. They completely are sterilizing them. That's one of, and of course, we know that's one of their big missions. They've got to cut the world population down. So let's sterilize a bunch of these individuals. It's so sick and twisted, and it's absolutely directly going after those that are traumatized already. I mean, how sick and twisted is that in humanity?
What's incredible, I think, about it is it highlights for everyone out there, and it's highlighting, I think, for a lot of individuals that are on that side of the fence, that there is much more at play to the decision making than is really being shown out, right? When we look at the CCP having an interest in 8 out of every 10 of American psychological or psychiatric degrees, or in
Hmm.
6 of every 10 medical degrees that come out of the American medical system, and who the biggest donors to these systems are, right? Pfizer is the
Yes.
largest donor to the American Medical Pediatric Association, right? And so
Yeah.
we expect, or they expect, I would have to say, and some sort of return on investment. And I think that is really a way that we can actually approach these individuals, who a lot of whom, because of the sorts of media they consume and the circles that they have walked in for a long time, are very hostile to the idea of centralized authority. They're very
Yeah.
hostile to the idea of being told what to do, or any sort of limitation on what they believe to be their right to self-expression. And so
Hmm.
highlighting that there is a financial entanglement that they are directly associated in. In other words, you are the hamster on the wheel, whether you realize it or not. And allowing
Right.
them to understand that it is these same corporations, these corporate entities, right? When we look at Pfizer and who Pfizer funds, when we look at Moderna and who Moderna funds, when we look at the largest financial contributors to large healthcare systems, right? And we look at who's actually financially benefiting, it is the corporate Wall Street mafia. It is the BlackRock,
Yes.
Vanguard, and State Street mafia. It is the world financial interests, the very billionaires who this group of individuals and many others on the radical left that are outside of this particular subsect are very hostile to, and who understand sort of intuitively that they've never been about the little guy. You talked about
Right.
how they weaponize the trauma against those individuals who are most susceptible to receiving and internalizing large levels of trauma. And I believe that's absolutely purposeful. When we look at someone who has a very large heart, or a very big capacity to care and to trust and to believe in the idea that the world is somehow a good place. These are sort
Hmm.
of the higher flying souls of us, if you want to call it that. Many of us out there that listen to programs like this, I think we're much more realistic, and we've certainly had
Yeah.
life shown to us in a number of ways that causes some jading, that causes some cynicism, but that refinement, those cuts within the gemstone, if you will, they produce such wisdom and such clarity. And so these individuals,
Yeah.
these very young, very compassionate, and I mean, usually very young, anywhere from,
They
adolescent
are.
years up to the late 20s, early 30s. This group of individuals, they demonstrate a very large capacity for trust and for this idea that the world is just supposed to be a good place. And
Right.
so their comprehension for this type of the types of levels of evil that we discuss on programs like this and others, or the real shadow powers at the very top, um, they're really not receptive to hearing about a lot of that, right? And so we have to be
Exactly.
compassionate. We have to be compassionate, like you highlighted, and appreciate that if we can help them to get inside their own thoughts and start understanding the world, then they can begin a process of one dice falling and knocking over another dice. And now we have
Right.
a curious question here. And now I'm wondering who funds that. And well, is this really safe? Maybe I should look on TikTok and look up for, some sort of review of this procedure or group or thing that I'm confused about, right? It sort of spawns
Right.
off their version of an awakening process. And I really do think that if we handle it correctly as patriots on the other side, firmly, lovingly, but unwaveringly, right?
Yeah.
Yes, you do have a right to express yourself, but you do not have a right to convince yourself of a self that is not possible that you're wishing to express.
Right.
You
Exactly.
cannot allow you to convince yourself to argue against your own soul, because even Jesus came out and
Right.
said, what would it profit a man if he gains the whole world and yet loses his
Yeah.
soul? And
That's right.
this group of individuals, this is a soul level journey in many respects. You talked earlier about the medical procedures that are involved in such things, and those procedures are largely permanent and irreversible.
They really are.
Right now, we
And
have a
there and it's a narrative that they don't believe. My daughter has come after me, right? She hears these things and She actually contacted the Huffington Post. They did a 25-page hit piece against me last month, well, in the end of June, saying, all these horrible things about me. And one of her big arguments was how stupid I am that I would say that taking testosterone at these high levels is going to cause her to be infertile. That's the whole mind twisting. They have gotten these kids to believe that what the medical community is speaking as truth is not really true. It's the same thing. You're not really a girl, you're a boy. You're not really a boy, you're a girl. It's such deep mind control and brainwashing. I mean, it's amazing when you can see it. Obviously, like us, we see the truth about it. It's very complicated for me to even understand how can they fall for this. But they've been working on the minds for generations through TV and through, the 5G. I mean, all these things that are around us, I think are impacting the ability for someone to, nobody has common sense anymore. Nobody knows how to debate. I remember going to debate class in high school and having to learn, how do I listen to what the other person is saying and then respond with where I believe and how I want to respond, and proving why I respond the way I do. Nobody knows how to do that anymore, which is why they are all very open to uh, coming to their own conclusions, and creating their own reality.
Well, and that sort of speaks to the broader, and this is a perfect segue. I'm so glad you teed it up like this. This speaks to the broader MKUltra program that has been awash on all of humankind for a very long time, right? When we consider that there are multiple levels to the human consciousness, we have a conscious presence right here and now, and we can actually measure differing states of consciousness on brain waves and EEGs and electron systems,
Right.
all of these
Yeah.
things, right? So when we consider that our consciousness has multiple layers and that there are layers of our being, there are layers of our consciousness that are here and present with us right here, right now, but we are not necessarily consciously aware of these different levels all of the time or
Hmm.
even most of the time. Um, and yet those very areas help us set up habits and help us remember patterns, and they help us
Yeah.
establish systems of modality and systems of behavior that are beneficial. They help us remember the tiny little nuanced door openings or the drawer that has the jiggly handle. And
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
area of our consciousness helps us govern a lot of how we walk through life. And because it is not totally in conscious control in most instances, although I think you can exercise conscious control with it, um, it does not question whether or not what the being, you as the organism, the host, the person, the soul living within the body, it does not sort of question or understand or offer an opinion on the input that you receive. It accepts it as true and real. And so if
Hmm.
you consume traumatic movies, if you consume traumatic storylines, if you consume very doom and gloom style podcasts, if you
Yes.
consume
Hmm.
the news in any form, if you consume pornography and the sort of abusive lens that nearly all of it is offered in,
Yeah.
if these are the inputs that you're receiving in, and you have a large
Hmm.
area of your human consciousness and your psyche that is connected to your soul, and it's not questioning whether or not it's real, I think the
Hmm.
supposition that is logical is that it probably assumes everything that you bring in is real. And so you
Yes.
create
So
these
good.
pockets of trauma where you may not even fully understand that that trauma is going on. I've heard testimony from different reformed pornography addicts who would talk about, I had these things where they would say, I had no idea that I was expressing this sexual based trauma or this childhood
Right.
trauma or this trauma that was left over from a very, very ugly divorce. I had no idea that that's actually what I was doing. I wasn't really seeking pleasure. I was seeking compensation for the trauma rather than handling whatever the underlying event really was, because I did not know that it was there. I was just only sort of cursorily aware of it. Things felt off. Things felt weird. I felt anxious all of the time. I felt out of my own skin
Right.
all of the time.
Yes.
Um,
Hmm.
and so when we consider that this is the lens that they have created and then used on humanity. MKUltra is a military grade psychological and intelligence based operation to affect consciousness and to control
Yeah.
states of being. The CIA through Project Montauk and many other dark projects, Artichoke, Operation Ultra, which was the
Hmm.
prelude to MKUltra, and many, many, many others were focused at how do
Yeah.
we control the overall thought activity of mankind and keep them in a state of being where we can manage um, how they think and look at the world, and we can also profiteer at
Yeah.
the greatest possible extent. And that's exactly what we've had. We've had a self-perpetuating money laundering matrix that creates the trauma generationally in many respects, and then sells the solution for 60 to 80 years. And now we have sort
Right.
of taken that trauma to the next level, which I think makes some sense when we consider that humanity is taking its awakening process and its understanding and view of what is possible in the world also to the next
Hmm.
level at the same time, right? Tucker Carlson on episode 1 of his new Tucker on Twitter show, coming out on episode 1, his very first inaugural address on this platform, and saying that extraterrestrials are real. And so is non-human life and non-human technology, and the
Yeah.
US government has been hiding it from you. So,
Hmm.
and with others like him coming out with very, very specific understandings of what's going on in the world, and they're relating those understandings. And so it's filling in the web of why do we have
Yeah.
such an antithetical to life based system? Why do we have a system that is a clearly a debt slave system? Why do we have a system that is
Yes.
clearly a medical slave system, right? If modern medicine worked, for example, outside of certain instances where I think trauma and triage, I think it has a very useful place. Don't get me wrong. I benefited from modern medicine
Hmm.
very extensively just recently, but it is worth noting that if prescription based medicine, if prescription based courses of treatment really worked, you would take them maybe one, two, or three times, and then you would never have to take them
Right.
again. And instead, we actually
Yeah.
have come up with this term called maintenance medication. And it's literally that, to
Yeah.
maintain. It's medication to maintain. It is clearly symptomatic treatment. And so this understanding of the world makes much more sense when we consider that there is a shadow power, that they have had the ability to
Yeah.
pull the levers of finance and government and business and academia for a very long time, that CCP infiltration has primarily been the real world manifestation of that shadow power through the
Hmm.
CCP government and their espionage warfare operations around the world, and how they've
Yeah.
infiltrated not just the United States, education and government and finance, but also many, many other nations. And we look at who is
The whole
financially
world. Yeah.
interested in all of this. It comes sort of as no surprise that we've had this level of program, and the only way that we can
Hmm.
break this level of programming is to operate at a higher level, is to operate in a higher state of consciousness. One cannot be
Yeah.
um, sort of hostile to an ideology or a division, maybe with rare righteous indignation exceptions, and still be flying in a very high, wonderful, Holy Spirit filled place. And we have to come
Right.
from that
Not
place
pause. Yeah.
when we're talking to the
Yeah.
radical left, because the radical left, whether they're the
Absolutely.
trans or the climate folks or the animal people or whoever they are, right? The ridiculousness just in general that encompasses a lot of those systems
All
of
of it.
belief,
Hmm.
they are in a place where that higher level consciousness, if we can get them to spend any time around us, becomes attractive. It becomes
Yeah.
appealing. It becomes very nice to see how happy we are in the face of such death, carnage, and destruction around the world, in the face of the Biden train wreck fake
Right.
administration, in the face of World War III and nuclear scares, right? And yet we come to it
Hmm.
with a strength of character and a strength of spirit that is attractive and encouraging. And it's sort of infectious. And so we can't do that if we're mired down in, well, I don't know how you could have fallen for it. Well, I don't know why you went this way. Well,
Hmm.
I can't believe you did this. Condescension will
Right.
only breed the rift even more, right? We have to appreciate that they don't have
Yeah.
the answer to those questions either. And it is because we're
And I think
coming.
that's what,
Yes, go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead. I was going to say, I think that also it's, that's part, the whole fight, the whole constant attack against those, and you kind of started all of this conversation off with that. That has been what the deep state, if you will, that's been what they've depended on. Let's get everybody so angry with each other that there's no room for anyone to work together because everyone's constantly fighting each other. Everyone's constantly saying, "You're wrong, I'm right. No, I'm right, you're wrong." I mean, that's the absolute bottom line is what we're seeing. And if we can't, I mean, we see it among the conservatives. I mean, we see it among the conservatives against the liberals. We see it against all areas. I mean, I've seen it within the Patriots, right? It's everywhere. It's this constant battle for, nope, I'm right, you're wrong. We have got to, I love, you're saying, be aware of our consciousness. I mean, the word says we are to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. That is something physical. I think the church has kind of forgotten or been misled of what that scripture actually means. That literally is understanding that our brains are a computer. They really are. And we can rewire them. We can learn. I remember years ago, I had some trauma myself, like all of us do. And I got connected with this amazing group. They were neurosurgeon biofeedback doctors, if you will. And they were Christians and just amazing, these amazing guys. And they would hook me up, hook my mind up. And they literally would tell me, okay, now, what are you thinking? And I'm like, I don't think I'm thinking anything. Well, yeah, we can see you're thinking something. And I'm like, what am I thinking? Like I wasn't even aware of what my own mind was doing. So could you imagine if the church, if those who are Christ followers actually understood this, and then we could actually have the compassion and have the ability to help others rewire, redo our minds, get our level of awareness and consciousness lifted to a place where, wait a minute, I am feeling this and thinking this, and so how do I work through this, and how do I process this without causing damage to others or damage to myself? It's such an interesting thing now that we can see all that. And unfortunately, I think that the church has kind of missed it as far as that scripture, because that's really what it's talking about.
I think as we look through history and as we look through how the operations of these individuals at the top of government power and influence in the world in various areas have always operated, the manipulation of the good things for us or the inversion of the good things for us has sort of always been the tactic. Look at penicillin. Look at other refined
Hmm.
versions of mineral chemicals that have been super concentrated in the lab, but which show up in nature, excuse me, in a very much less concentrated way and are very, very beneficial in those doses to humankind. When we consider that our spirituality, our religious understanding of the world has absolutely been, at the very least, affected in some way by corruption at the
Yeah.
very top. You have a lot of folks
Yes.
out there that,
Hmm.
in the Catholic Church, they're wonderful people, and they'll come out and they'll say, look, we have seen the patterns that there is something going on. Um,
Yeah.
Definitely at the Vatican level, but even sometimes at the archdiocese level, and something just isn't adding
Yeah.
up. There's certain things that should be going or that shouldn't be continuing that are continuing. And a lot of times it's the same people, right? And so we consider that there is some
Yeah.
amount of weaponization, if you will, or some amount of militarization of this deep state within these arenas culturally. They're very important to us. Excuse me.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'd like to close it with on is coming back to um, our higher selves, our best selves, the best version of ourselves that is available to us, right? When we act in cooperation with
Hmm.
the spirit of the Almighty, we are the fullest versions of ourselves, right? That's when inspiration comes. That's
Yeah.
when the good ideas come. That's when the good timing happens, right? The right place, right time.
Yeah.
And it just sort of took from there, right? These sorts of things, we all know what they look like in our own lives. and they only come to us when
Hmm.
we're in a sort of a symbiotic place with that greater love. And it is a greater love because we have
Yeah.
to find a way, and I think it looks different for everyone, to extract our own ego just for a little while, not necessarily from
Yeah.
a condemnation point of view, but from a I want to appreciate something at a greater clarity point of view. And we look at it
Hmm.
and we attempt to entertain a different lens about it. What would God say about what I'm looking at right now? If I was able to have a conversation with the Almighty that is looking at everyone and everything all of the time and that sustains everything around us and all of us, what
Yeah.
would that spirit say to me? And appreciating a
Mm.
broader perspective is very liberating, and it helps us get, I think, control of our institutions back. We're not going to beat them at their own game. I believe when Q
Right.
references this idea of game theory, I think that game theory is it's a military term and a psychological warfare operations lens type of term, but it is also about rewriting the game, playing the game fairly now, playing it by new rules. They have always
Hmm.
warped the system. They have always stacked the deck. There has always been a hidden ace. It's never been winnable in their fashion and in their form. So if we flip the game on them, and there's a lot more of us than there are them, eventually,
Yeah.
and I don't think it takes much time at all, our institutions, our ways of life, um, regardless of the power grabs that they may make, and regardless of any military actions that may or may not happen, their ability to influence in the world becomes irrelevant in just a matter of time, because humanity will pick, and we have demonstrated that we will always pick the godly way.
Yep.
We will always move away from these sorts of very sick, evil practices. That's not to say that there's not bad in humanity, and that's not to say that there's not a negative side of human nature. We're all capable of horrible thoughts, right? That's just
Of
a thing. We
course.
have the free will to do that. But by and large, when we look at the levels of evil that we're dealing with and the levels of evil that have had control of all of the different sectors that you've described here today and that we've talked about that affect our young ones and affect our future, it's really not the first conception that comes to most people's minds. And so we are more love based beings, and we have to operate that way and encourage the radical left to the greatest extent possible to also do so. What they're operating in is not true unconditional love. And we know that if the love happens to do with Trump, it's not love anymore. If the love happens to do
Exactly.
with God, it's not love anymore. That's
Yeah.
conditional love. Unconditional love is something that we have to model. And they have to
Hmm.
learn how to express that again. And some of them will. I think many of them will, but some of them, unfortunately, are just too deep in the program. And even Q acknowledges this. So
Yeah.
when we look at our future, Miss Tanya, in our closing here, and I want to get to your channels in just a moment so people know where to find you, but I'm just curious on your take on this. What does a love-based future built intentionally look like?
All I can think is to go back to what the word describes, what the Bible actually says love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is good. Love is long suffering. Love is not seeking your will above the others. It's not prideful. It's not arrogant. Um, it's compassionate. That's what love. And we have to go back to what the Bible says love is, because that is the definition. That is what love is. You know what I mean? The world has taken love and they've twisted it and they've renamed it and and it's not even, I hate to even give humanity credit because it's not humanity, it's the devil. It's been the devil since the beginning of time. That's the root of it. The devil has tried to steal, kill, and destroy, and in order to do that, he has to twist truth. And so when we look at what is love, 1 Corinthians 13:4, it's patient, it's kind, it does not envy, it is not boastful, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others. That's huge. We dishonor each other so often, even within our friends and our families, we dishonor. It doesn't self seek, it is not easily angered, it keeps no records of wrongs. Can you imagine a world where when we got wounded, we could actually forgive and move on. I mean, that alone would change humanity. It doesn't delight in evil. It actually rejoices in the truth. That's what the word says. Love rejoices in truth. So when you think of all the truth that's out there right now, and there's a lot of truth out there, but the ones that cannot accept it, they cannot think about it. They don't want to hear it. If someone love in itself rejoices in the truth. It protects, it trusts, it hopes, it perseveres. And so to me, that's what I would suggest. Those are the traits, those are the things that if we need to get back to the root of love, that's what love is. 1 Corinthians 13:4.
Where can people find you, Miss Tania?
Yes, my website is probably the best place, which is taniajoy.tv. And my name is spelled a little different. So for those that are just audio listeners, it's Tania Joy. And then I'm on Rumble, I'm on Spreely TV, I'm on Bless News Network, and those are all like within, channels within Roku, Fire Stick, Amazon. I'm on Instagram and Twitter, although I post the most on Instagram. I think that I'm at Real Tania Joy Gibson on Instagram. And I do have a Facebook page, which is Beauty for Ashes with Tania Joy. So there's a little bit of things everywhere that people can find me.
Well, folks, there you have it. And I don't think it could have been said any better. A world built on love should be built on the principles that built our Bible and our world. They should be built on the principles that have built every honest, well meaning, love based school of thought anywhere. Because that's what humanity is, right? We are the manifestation of God's love in this world. We are the image and likeness of a compassionate, kind creator who, at the end of the day, while there is room, I think, for righteous wrath and righteous indignation and these sorts of things, it has been demonstrated time and again that it is primarily a God of love and passion that we really do serve. And so I guess at the end of the day, Miss Tania, all I can say is I really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate the audience for taking the time to listen as long as they have. We don't normally hit an hour. And so we're coming up right on that here. I thank you for that. It's actually been a rousing conversation. And I hope you have a wonderful day,
It's
ladies and gentlemen.
fantastic.
This
Thank
is SG
you.
Anon.
You as well.
We'll be back with you again soon on the Q News Patriot. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.